Hi, my name's Harper West, and I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm co-author of the best-selling book, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health professionals assess a president. In my last video, I talked about how domestic abusers and authoritarian personalities share the same type of personality. And Donald Trump, our current president, shares a lot of these behaviors. He has a spectrum of behaviors that appear random and unrelated, but they're really very closely connected because, as I explained, they all relate to this emotion called shame. And it's important to recognize this fact so that we do not continue to dismiss these behaviors as merely due to some unexplainable or untreatable alleged brain disease, which they're not. I believe it's essential to educate widely about the real cause of Trump's personality because the traits he exhibits are the very behaviors that authoritarian personalities have exhibited for thousands of years, whether they lead a country or a company or a family. If more people understood and recognized these behaviors as unhealthy, perhaps future generations wouldn't get hijacked into believing these very persuasive but abusive and destructive personalities. I actually propose that the diagnostic labels that are often used for Trump, such as narcissistic or sociopathic, that they actually be consolidated because they are all caused by feelings of unworthiness. Shame is a very powerful emotion that is actually the foundation of morals and ethics because it mediates for fairness and kindness in relationships. It's a survival-oriented emotion because it helps ensure that we behave well so that we're continually accepted in our tribe, basically. And this is what gives it such a powerful pull on our behaviors, both for good and bad. Shame makes us behave in morally and socially acceptable ways, and it can also make us behave in very unhealthy ways. Shame can lead to these behaviors like lying and greed and self-centeredness. And that's the conundrum of shame. It's designed to improve social relationships when it's tolerated in healthy ways, but when it's poorly tolerated, it can cause really unhealthy behaviors and can block social connection. Poor shame tolerance is actually the root cause of most immoral human behaviors that are currently labeled as things like narcissistic and sociopathic. With this understanding of what is causing all of Trump's volatile and random behaviors, you will recognize this pattern. He starts off with a baseline of feeling very inadequate or unworthy. And then he's on guard or fearful for being ashamed or criticized or humiliated. And then he reacts in various ways to control that distressing experience. People who lack healthy self-acceptance are highly motivated to manage their shame and fear because the emotional discomfort these feelings cause them are so great. They tend to respond with three very predictable and easily explained behavioral responses. And I call these behaviors blame shifting. They're very counterproductive in human relationships, but they feel safe for the person who engages in them. The three behaviors that are blame shifting are other blaming, which is what Trump does a lot of, shoves off the blame to someone else. It's never his fault. It's never his owning the accountability for his behaviors. There's self-blaming behaviors, which we call lash in at the self in self-deprecating or self-critical ways. And then just blame avoiding, which is setting up your life in a way that sort of avoids conflict or someone holding us accountable. So shame is what causes all authoritarians like Trump to want to do things like crush the opposition party, discredit the press, to name call and dismiss anyone who is investigating them, like Robert Mueller. It makes Trump have a very difficult time compromising or negotiating because that feels like failure or losing to him. Shame and inadequacy make Trump lie, blame shift, project, and make excuses for his behavior. And sadly, these immoral behaviors are directly counter to what most of us consider to be the values of democracy, which are about truth and fairness and justice and equality. I'd like to believe that most leaders can overlook their own emotional fears and insecurities to do what is in the best interest of the country. And we've been fortunate to have some very strong leaders like President Obama who exhibited these traits of accountability and good shame tolerance. But Donald Trump is an extreme other blamer. He will only look out for his own emotional needs, and we see this on a daily basis. I recently watched the movie The Post, which was about the Pentagon Papers, And these secret documents revealed that 70% of the decision making regarding the Vietnam War, which was continued through 5 presidents, was really about these presidents and their fear of humiliation. Not one of these presidents wanted to own losing that war, so they kicked the can down the road. Nixon continued the war very consciously, causing hundreds of thousands of additional deaths and injuries on both sides and throughout the Southeast Asia, because he and advisors knew that the war was unwinnable. They knew it had no strategic value, yet they continued it anyway. And that shows the power of shame, the deep destructive power of this emotion. It's a very powerful driver of human immorality when it's poorly tolerated. In contrast, if a leader can tolerate shame and failure, she can admit a fault and make better decisions. Real leaders say that the buck stops here. We must, as a society, recognize the power of shame and confront it. We must learn to tolerate this emotion. We must learn to admit our imperfections and flaws so that shame does not have this destructive power over us. More importantly, we must elect leaders who can tolerate shame so that they can make good moral choices, no matter how it impacts their tender emotional insecurities. If you like this video, don't be scared. Share. Coming up next, I'm going to do a series of videos specifically breaking down some of Trump's behaviors from this perspective of poor shame tolerance. For more on shame and how low self-worth drive all human behaviors, go to my website, which is harperwest.co. Check it out. Resist.